Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. It's important that we also showcase our roles and responsibilities as government in the agricultural environment. So, unfortunately, I'm a middleman that you cannot ignore. We all play a role in the trading environment. So, I will be emphasizing phytosanitary measures that are very important. It's becoming very important for us to apply the correct phytosanitary measures, especially with the increase in trade. And with that, we are also exposed to new threats, new pests that we wouldn't want to have in the country. So our role as regulator is to safeguard our agricultural industry, our natural resources, so that we can be free of those pests. The application of those measures are unfortunately very challenging. We have to apply measures that are beyond our scope. We have to work with the industries, get information on certain risks, pests. Another major issue is also the cost of compliance, especially from an exporting perspective. You get phytosanitary measures that are applied by your importing country, and it becomes quite expensive for us to comply to those measures, especially the developing and least developing countries. I've done a study before where it showed that we had to do a lot of investments to comply to certain programs. It's costing us a lot of money to be able to comply. And unfortunately, with certain phytosanitary measures, it affects us in terms of food security and also trade. So, why focus on these measures? Again, just to define the measures, a phytosanitary measure is any plant health legislation, regulation, or official procedure that we can use to prevent the introduction of harmful pests into the country. So our focus is on prevention, control, mitigation to limit the introduction, the spread, and the establishment of those new pests. Because we've seen what the effects are of the introduction of new pests into South Africa. It has affected a lot of industries. I don't know if you've heard about fall armyworm. That's just one of those big ones. A lot of insects. So it becomes quite costly for us to deal with the invasion of new pests into our industry. As a institution, we've also made a huge investment in terms of personnel, infrastructure, because we need to be able to perform those measures effectively. So I'm sure some of you are very familiar with this, but we do not thumb suck when it comes to phytosanitary measures. We are guided by the WTO SPS agreement. It provides us with a framework of rules and provisions, and in that we are able to determine what is the appropriate level of measures we need to apply to protect plant life and health in South Africa. So, furthermore, we are also guided by the IPPC, which is the International Plant Protection Convention, which is a standard-setting body that relates to plants. There, they also provide us with insight into measures that we need to apply. They provide us with standard measures, normally international standards on phytosanitary measures, which we also use in terms of our functions. And they also set out how we as a governing body or as a national plant protection organization need to be able to perform our functions. So the authority in South Africa is DAFF, which is the competent authority that deals with those issues. And as a National Plant Protection Organization of South Africa, we basically consist of 3 directorates, which is plant health. Plant health is responsible for policy setting. We have inspection services, and they are responsible for the implementation of those policies. And we have food import and export standards. They are responsible for standard setting and also for creating awareness in terms of pests. So in terms of our mandate, we have a lot of responsibilities. We issue phytosanitary certificates for exports, because there are various requirements for exporting plant material. Another major responsibility is that we need to perform surveillance. This is very important because we need to show to our trading partners that we do not have certain pests, or where we do have certain pests, we have to show that we have done extensive work in terms of showing what the spread of those pests are. And sometimes we are able to regulate the spread of those diseases. And that is important because it gives assurance to our trading partner that certain pests are regulated, it's not spreading, so we are able to export some of our very important crops to our trading partners. So that is one function that is very critical. Another one is inspection of consignments. We need to ensure that consignments are inspected according to international standards, and that we can also again give assurances of any freedom of pests. We need to disinfect consignments as well. And another major one is also to protect our endangered areas. The same as with the surveillance programs, is to make sure that there are no harmful pests present, and if there should be, what are we doing about it? One major big area also within the phytosanitary environment is conducting pest risk analysis. This is very important. This is a scientifically based process where we need to determine which pests are involved in certain crops. We will then decide whether they are economically important, but based on scientific evidence. We will then decide whether they should be listed as quarantine pests for South Africa. And I think once that process has been determined, we then focus on what type of measures we need to impose to deal with those listed pests. And phytosanitary measures that could be involved is post-entry quarantine, as well as diagnostic analysis. We also need to ensure phytosanitary security of consignments, and another important one is also training and development of staff. It's important that our staff are updated with new developments, new technologies, so that we can support our agricultural industry. This is just to show you some of the threats that I took from our quarantine list, like plumpox, Xylella fastidiosa is a big one in Europe at the moment. It has a wide dose range, so we wouldn't want to have this pest in our country at the moment because because of the effect of that bacterium. There are some others as well. We also have pest that has established itself, like I said earlier, but we do have measures in place to deal with them. So when you want to import plant material into South Africa, there's a process that needs to be followed. There are import requirements per commodity. Again, like I said, it has been determined by a pest risk analysis process. So you would be able to understand what are those pests that are of importance to us and what needs to be complied with. We would issue a permit, and that would indicate the volumes, the variety. It will also indicate in the import requirements for that specific commodity, and what the process would be, what process it should be following. In some cases, we have to issue a phytosanitary certificate when we are exporting, or a phytosanitary certificate needs to be provided by the exporter. And that is important to give assurances in terms of compliance with additional declarations, which are normally within your import requirements. We would also perform inspections on those imported plant material, and then that basically allows us to figure out if there's compliance or non-compliance. We will then decide what line it would follow, whether we would send back or destroy or find some other mitigation option to deal with that. Like I said earlier, with plants for planting, it would normally go through a post-entry quarantine process, and there would be diagnostic evaluation, but I will provide more info on the next slides with that. And then depending on the outcome, there's either a final release or there could be a rejection based on whether the pest of quarantine important is present or not. So in the post-entry quarantine process, we would normally isolate imported plant material in quarantine. Quarantine can be at our own state-owned quarantine facilities, or it could be at a private-owned quarantine facility, depending on the risk associated with those imports. And while in quarantine, the plant material is subjected to various tests. It's monitored to determine whether the pest of quarantine importance is present in that material. There would normally be some type of treatments, whether it's fumigation or hot water treatment, depending on the type of plant material. And that is also another assurance to ensure that there's no pests present or escape. In the quarantine environment, what we have done as government is we are looking at avenues to fasten the process, because, I mean, quarantine can become a very long process once you're looking for the pest of quarantine concern. So we have engaged with a lot of other governments where there are suppliers, where we can set criteria for accreditation of those facilities. And if our phytosanitary conditions are met in that regard, there could be a much faster process of allowing that type of material to come into South Africa. So that is one of the things that we are working on. We have accredited one facility so far, but we are working with others as well. And the need is expressed by our industry in terms of what are the priorities in terms of those facilities. In terms of diagnostics, again, we are We are reliant on what the import conditions are stating, what type of pests there are. We need to ensure that when we test the material, it's free from those very important pests. The areas that we cover is quite diverse. It's nematology, it's virology, entomology, all the ologies you can think of. It's a huge, huge, huge job. And we based on whether it's conventional or molecular, because you can understand some pests have not been identified as to what the causal agent is. So you have to rely on various types of methodology to be able to detect those pests or diseases. Again, like I said, here we also focus on what is available in the international arena, because we do not have these pests. So we collaborate with a lot of researchers overseas to be able to assist us with this, so that we are able to correctly identify these pests and diseases. So we go through a lot of training and exposure. We send our personnel overseas to be trained by other experts so that they are able to identify these pests. And with any job comes with a lot of challenges. Like I said, we are very vulnerable to new threats. Our borders are porous to any new entry of pests, especially when there are illegal imports or there are non-compliant material coming into the country where we could not protect ourselves. We also have capacity and resource constraints. We are forever trying to plug that one with new technologies. So that's forever an ongoing process. One of the huge pressures in our environment is the need of the importers. There's a need to bring in new varieties into the country due to climate change, pest resistance, and with that we need to create a balance in terms of how we manage those risks and see to the needs of our importers. Because in the end, we want to make sure that there's value added to our agricultural industry and to the economy. Another important factor is that we also need to stay abreast on what is happening internationally with new pests. So sometimes that information is not available. So we have to rely on a lot of research and interaction with other experts all over the world. So for us to effectively apply phytosanitary measures in our environment, it is important that there's cooperation amongst all the stakeholders within the environment, scientists, assignees, producers, farmers. And for that, we need to make sure that there are systems in place, forums where we meet, where we are able to discuss these things, these issues. There's compliance issues that must be met. Again, effective communication amongst all stakeholders. And like I said earlier, reliable scientific information. I think in our environment, we try to work together to see what is the best way forward to deal with the phytosanitary issues that are there, and also to assist the industry with their needs going forward. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions?